Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm sure there's some of you men out there wondering what we women are up to today. Well, I'm so happy to be here to talk about this most important topic, talking about, intersectionality, microaggressions, and leading with fear. And very timely with that report that's come out today, which I shall keep nameless because we need that for another topic. But I'm hoping everyone's feeling great. You've got your coffee, or some of you've got your wine, the professional women out there, I know you've got your wine. So I'm welcoming you to a no fluff, no candy floss, no popcorn panel discussion. We've got an awesome lineup of women. I'm so proud of them because, they've done remarkable things in their career. And the first one I'm going to kick off with, let me do all of them. We've got Janet Hills, MBE. Congratulations on getting your MBE this year. She is Detective Sergeant, of course, but she's also the chair of the Met Black Police Association. We've got Dr. Dorian Wilson, and she's at Middlesex University now. I have been told she's been given a new role, but it hasn't come through yet. So she will have to tell you her I think it's co-chair of the anti-racist committee or something at Middlesex University, having left the diversity lead. In addition to that, she's a visiting professor and editor-in-chief. She's so multi-talented, and I can't wait for you to hear from her, especially if you haven't heard Dr. Dorian Wilson speak before. And finally, I've been after this woman for about a year, it's probably longer than that. And she wouldn't even answer my calls at first, and I pleaded with her on LinkedIn, and I finally wore her down. And I'm so glad to have Grace Moron-Folknu, MBE, and she is the chair of the National Black Crown Prosecution Association. Now, what was lovely about Grace, as soon as we spoke, we had our conversation. It was as if we were friends for years. So I'm really pleased to have her, and I know she'll bring a valuable contribution to this discussion today. So we haven't got much time. Get your comments coming in. Start thinking about what you want, what questions you want, and really do not make this a dull session. Fire it up and just make sure, put our panelists under pressure, under fire, and don't make them feel that this is another normal committee that they're on a panel discussion. So no pressure, but I'm going to call Janet Hills, MBE, chair of the Met MBA and former chair of the National Black Police Association. So Janet Hills, let me give you a nice National Black Women's welcome. Woo, 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 woo.
Hi,
Janet. How are you? How are you finding things at the moment? Lockdown.
I'm really looking forward to coming out of lockdown. All the restrictions, getting out there, meeting family, friends, going for a drink, doing all the nice stuff. So can't wait.
But what impact has it had on your members in terms of, because they're working differently, both professionally and obviously personally, because you've got to think about well-being, stress, etc. How is that? Have you seen a change?
Yeah, so all of those things have happened in terms of people's well-being and mental health. That has been a key thing. We've been looking to support each other, looking to have conversations and making sure that we're just keeping in touch with members and, family, friends, whoever, because that's so important as well, with everyone just working within the confines of their home.
Okay, so what I wanted to talk to you about was actually, how can we approach, intersectionality is now the buzzword of diversity. Unconscious bias is out. So it's now intersectionality. So give me your take on it.
So all I'd say, was there ever unconscious bias, really? But so in terms of the intersectionality part of it, for me, I got to learn about intersectionality around 2017. And that came about from one of our previous presidents from the National, Charles Critchlow, who just happened to say, we were at an event, and he happened to say in passing about intersectionality. It was almost like a throwaway sort of comment that was made. So I didn't say anything to him, but people give you that look as if to say, into what? So I went away, did a bit of research, and found out that the phrase itself was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and that actually it was specific to me. It was about Black women race intersecting with gender. So it was about me. So I became really interested in the subject matter. And then at the same time, I was president for the National, and I had a meeting in Derbyshire, and I was being dropped back to the station by a police PCSO, a black female, who sort of said to me, Janet, you're the first black female sergeant I've ever met. Now, in my head, in the Met, we're kind of plush with officers, especially black women, at all ranks. So in terms of what she was saying to me, it didn't really kind of collate. It didn't really sort of make me think. It just made me think.
What did it make you think? As she
Sorry, there's something happening at the door. Yeah, so it made me think to myself, how is it that, you know, this woman from Derbyshire can say to me that I'm the first black female sergeant? So I did, again, a little bit more digging, a little bit more research in terms of what the land looked like for black women in policing. And I came to find out that actually some constabularies didn't have any black women in them at all. And then in terms of, you know, my own force, there were gaps. So, you know, we had black women in most of the ranks, but there were some gaps, especially at the senior ranks, where we weren't seeing that for our white counterparts. So then in terms of what I do in policing, the other thing that flagged up to me was, in terms of being counted, I was either being counted in the gender side of things, or I was being counted on the BAME, and I say that acronym loosely, side of things. So it was like, well, where am I? You know, you're counting sort of like women, but they predominantly are white women, and then you're counting race, but then they're predominantly men. So what had happened in terms of how we collated our data, which we do a really good job at collecting data, we were looking at the data in silos. So what we've done basically was unwittingly formed a gap for black women. So we had fallen through the gap. So our representation amongst gender is again quite small in terms of our white counterpart, and we know how well gender is doing. So we know that gender currently nationally are about 40% for women in the police service, and in the Met it's around about the 30%, 31% marker. So we've seen massive strides, but in terms of that success, you don't see black women enjoying that success along with our white female counterparts. And then similarly in race, what you've got is obviously men are joining and they're being counted in terms of race, but again, black women. So for me, what we need to do is actually look at the intersections of diversity through all of the strands to ensure that we're not missing and we're not creating unwittingly these gaps that we've now seen have occurred in terms of our numbers and, you know, the look and feel of our organisations in comparisons to representation within the community.
But also there's a big push around the sexuality, around LGBTQ, in terms of marking that. And again, who benefits? Because I think in unconscious bias, yes, I have a bias, but does that make management or leaders accountable for making sure there's a reflective change in representation within the organisation? And I think that the models are, you know, are very systematic. So we may think, because we're busy and distracted collecting data and trying to make sure we've got everything going, that we're actually missing the mark.
Yeah, and that's basically what has happened. And it's so important now. We have to adapt. We have to change to the societal needs. So whereas that was acceptable back then, now as we move forward, that actually people's intersectionality is what makes them unique. You know, women are multifaceted, and just because you see me as a black female, isn't the only characteristic that I hold, but it's probably the one that would cause me the most sort of challenge.
Yeah. And also think about things around faith now, because obviously that's a bit of a challenge now in terms of many representing your faith openly. I think a lot of Christians feel challenged in the workplace. And again, that all adds to the different, as you say, filters or facets of the intersectionality. And it can go on and on and on, because are you a single mother? What is your socioeconomics levels, etc.? And that model could be used in any organisation. So bearing in mind in the Met, what advice would you say to, especially women and leaders, in terms of how we manage intersectionality so it doesn't become another buzzword, another trend? That, like, a bit like unconscious bias, because unconscious bias, they're now saying, has no value.
Well, in terms of the intersectionality, for me, it's not something that is going to go away, because we've got the protected characteristics. So we just now have to find a way of collating the information so that we are able to bring our whole selves to work. So in terms of myself, I've got 5 protected characteristics, and that actually in terms of my needs, that they're able to understand that in terms of, you know, at any one time, any issue could come to the fore, but they need to be in a position to understand that happens, that I'm not just a Black gender female. I'm not.
And then you've got to look at
more to me than that, and actually what I have to offer and the talent I have to offer is more than that.
Well, that's interesting, because if you look at, as you say, I mean, you've got intergenerationality, you've got to look at where it's different leadership styles, but actually we say we want to bring our authentic self to the workplace, and because that's part of our talent, that's what's going to make the organization more productive, more profitable, more inclusive. But again, it's still a challenge. And I think that where some organizations have managed outside, where have you seen that demonstrated from somewhere within your organization, as an organization, whether it's public, private, internationally? I mean,
so in terms of what we do now, clearly, instead of just having white and non-white in terms of counting, we actually do break that down. So the gender is broken down into Black females, and then that's also taken away from, obviously, the Black and Asian figures, in that we are now an individual counting point to understand, again, how we address, in terms of, say, recruitment and progression, the needs of a Black or Asian female within policing, and the fact that we need to have them in policing. So we're actually a individual strand of our own, but again intersected with the 2 strands that they were counting already. So, you know, that's progression. But again, as you say, there are a number of strands where that can cross over and intersect. So we need to be able to keep the umbrella, but also within that prioritize around whatever the issue is and where we need to focus our resources. And, you know, we are doing that at the moment.
But at every level of the organisation, that means there needs to be accountability from managers to leaders to champions and ambassadors of the organisation. Because when we have the millennials really taking over the workforce, is it going to be something like 2/3? They'll make up 2/3 of the workplace. They're looking for something completely different in the workplace. They really want an inclusive workplace. Do you believe that these models will provide those types of organizations where they will say, this is a place I'd like to be, this is a place I feel valued, this is a place where I can bring my lived experience in, I feel, you know, I'm being managed to my best ability? 1 minute.
Sorry, I'm smiling. You know, we have a ways to go. I think you are right. I think, you know, we do need to be proactive in that space. And you're right, it is down to the individuals, it's down to the leaders, it's down to the senior leaders. But the key responsibility here for me is with our human resources. You know, they are the ones that have got all of the means, that the studies, you know, they're working with other agencies, they're setting the policies. And for me, you know, if that is set at the right level to really hammer home the messaging around that inclusivity and that look and feel of an organization, then we are part way there, because people will follow those policy procedures in order to get the cultural change that we need.
And it's interesting you talk about HR driving that change, because I've always heard that HR are probably one of the biggest blockers. And also, if you look at the makeup of HR, it's not reflective of the types of individuals. So they don't feel that they understand where they're coming from. So I'm going to come back to you a bit later and talk to you about senior leadership and how at different, it's going to be parallel. So not only the individuals and the workers and the busy bees, it's also who deliver on these products and services. How are you making your senior management team accountable for what? Go on.
Yeah, can I just say, I love my HR. I love you.
She's probably on the show. Okay, Janet, thank you very much. And as I said, everyone, you know, we've got a dynamic lineup. So that's the Met Police. I mean, we hear so much about the Met Police, and so we often forget that there are actually challenges even for the staff, let alone being on the front line delivering the service, especially as a BME officer at every level. So if you've got questions about that, please put them in the comments. I really would like some comments. If not, you know, we can talk forever. So the next person I'd like to bring in is Dr. Dorian Wilson. Oh, Dorian's going to break this down in a way that no one else can. Dorian, can you tell them your new role? Because obviously I didn't get the title. Dorian, firecracker. I'm just going to shut my mouth and say, go for it, girl. Empowered woman. Go on.
Well, I'm one of 4 chairs, a co-chair of the university's anti-racism network. That's Middlesex University Business School, London Business School, the university per se.
Yeah.
It's one of my roles, but I'm a multiple award-winning diversity expert. I'm still learning, but I've been told it's a mantle I have to wear. So for me, it's not set in stone. I put myself out to learn, to understand, to build on, and to nurture inclusion. So that's where I'm at.
So basically, you know, we talked about we've talked about intersectionality, microaggressions, and leadership, leading with fear. What's your take on that?
Leading with fear. My take on it is perspectives. One of the perspectives is where there is a lack of awareness and understanding of people of different cultural backgrounds, subject to the cultural lens that we wear everywhere we go. We never take it off. And that is based on our cultural socialization, the family that we're born into. We do not notice the culture until we step out of it into somebody else's. Then we notice difference. And when you are in a position of authority, you're wearing that title, but you are aware there are things about people's cultural backgrounds, their ethnic group that we don't understand. I don't understand. And I have been at the forefront of a study where, for example, I was called in to share insight to help a particular public sector organization to identify why their providers, their educational providers, were not able to achieve their minimum equality and diversity measures. And this is
a bit of problem. Sorry, Dorian, we've got a problem with your mic, or are you too far away? Because we get a bit of feedback.
Oh, can you hear me now?
That's much better. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's a bit better.
Yeah.
In front of my mug. So I said that we are socialized. We wear our cultural lens wherever we go. We never take it off. And this becomes our guiding principle. Where does it come from? The socialization, the family that we're born into. We're nurtured in respect. We only notice it when we step out of it into somebody else's culture. It's like asking the fish, what's it like swimming in water? When that's all it does. Not until it flips its body out of the water can it then make some comparison and tell you, well, actually, this is what the air feels like. So where there is fear, and I was given an example of when I was actually commissioned to go into a corporate organization when it's a public sector organization, and that's because their providers, their educational providers, were finding it difficult to meet their minimum equality and diversity measures. But what I was able to ascertain, and I enabled them to see that for themselves, is that they judged others and they were providing a service that was not befit a diverse community, a diverse learning community that is ever changing. Diversity is very much a fluid process. We age, our needs differ. We get married, we're in a relationship, we're out of a relationship, and so on. So you have to tap into those changes to know how best to provide. But if you don't understand and you come into a position of authority without that knowledge and expertise, then it can be very challenging, as more than 85% of leaders that I was actually interviewing and basically going into the organization and having a chat with on a more one-to-one personal level. So they felt there was a level of trust that they could be open and honest, but 85% of them admitted that they knew that diversity was absolutely crucial for obvious reasons. The impact of globalization, not just in the classroom, but out of it. But they also said that they wouldn't admit that they don't understand it because it would create an untenable situation for them and instill that fear. So when they came across those who were more informed that did not look like them, they saw that as a challenge. And that relates to ethnocentrism. So ethnocentrism is where you have people of a particular culture or an ethnic group who are insensitive to other cultures and use their own cultural yardstick to measure others, such as what they eat, how they eat, what they wear, what they look like, and so on, which is not like us, and therefore marginalize those people in terms of how they view them and so on. And some of that.
It's a bit like the key to the colours, isn't it? In terms of, and you can apply all the different things, you know, where did you get your, if you're a man, it's like, do you buy your suit from Marks and Spencer's or do you go to Savile Row? Where's your cuffs from? And that defines where you are within that organisation. For women, it's the handbag and shoes, you know, and again, if you don't know, you turn up and then you look like, oh, she should be down at the other end rather than sitting at the table with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is human nature. As humans, we tag, we label people, but we have to be mindful that bestowing a tag or an identity tag on someone of choice is not our informed right. That label, i.e. the I in identity, should only be bestowed by the self, which is more comfortable at home with the self. That is not for anybody else to give us those tags, but we do that as human beings so we can benchmark them, we can have some sense of those people and so on. And also, if there's also the generational perspective. So what was acceptable 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago when I was a child? As we know, that racism was overt, and the terms and the words that you would be, the phrases that we use to label you and so on would not be acceptable today. But it doesn't mean it's gone away, because if you had people of those generations nurturing and bringing up their children to believe this is okay, this is the language, and they go on and so forth, then it's still there. It goes undercover. And the manifestation of that is in wider society.
So, you know, we talk about respect because there's, you know, amongst different cultures, it's defined very differently. And it's almost like an informal caste system, which is how I would, in its simplest form. But again, let's talk about, if you're going into the workplace, how that impacts in terms of values and how you manage and how you operate within an organization. Because sometimes you don't even know you're doing it. Or behaving in that manner. Sorry, you don't realize you're behaving in that manner.
Where it's implicit, where it is truly implicit, where you really do not realize that you're judging others, you're treating others, you're promoting or not promoting others because you judge them in a particular way based on your bias. And that bias can relate to if you assume that certain groups of people are lazy you'll be more inclined not to want to recruit them or promote them and so on. And from the other perspective, if you feel these other groups of people are hard workers, you're going to be inclined to recruit them. It also relates to the horns and the halo effect. So that's HR terms. So the horns effect is if, for example, at an interview, you have a potential candidate who's good enough to be the right person for the job, to tick those boxes, but because you perceive them in a particular way, they don't support the right football club. They live on the wrong side of the fence. Yeah, they have a particular surname. This is, again, all the labeling, but we have to be mindful that everyone has a bias. It's absolutely crucial to come up or be up close with that bias. Spotlight the bias.
It's interesting because I was going to say, Dorian, please be conscious to come closer to the mic. And Janet brings up HR, the whole HR department, but we've had masses of issues in terms of not only HR, but recruitment companies actually being the biggest blockers of the progression of people of colour within organisations and also within companies and different professions, we might as well say. Do you feel that's changed?
No, it depends on who's leading, who's doing the recruiting, put my teeth in. But if those people, again, the cultural lens that they wear, if it's a biased one, then they're going to operate and select people based on a biased perspective. And we have to be mindful of that. It is absolutely crucial that we're mindful of that. So on your CV, for example, if that's the process of an application or selection, your CV, then you have to be mindful. If you have a surname that very clearly suggests that you're not British, then be mindful. You could be marginalized. We do not live in an ideal world. The ideology of the world is to be mindful that people will judge, people will assess rightly or wrongly, or those reviews are based on stereotypes, perceptions, and bias. And we have to be mindful of it and prepare for it. And the ideal is to promote cultural awareness so people can see for themselves up close, regardless of the color of my skin, my gender, my ethnicity, my sexual orientation, and so on. That has nothing to do with my ability to do the job and do it well. If that's what you've seen, then that's going to be.
But I want to interject there because actually that's about, for me, it's about education and whether people understand the process. Many people don't understand the process, which is why they're at the other end of the pipeline. So how do we get them to progress up to the pipeline when you have maybe a senior management team or a board that actually is the same? They look the same, they talk the same, they think the same. But yet the journey is up there. And for many, even if for white women are saying, look, I can't cope with this. No, it's too much. I'm going to go work for a charity. So how are we supposed to be able to offer, because it's not just what we're going through, how do we make sure that we're bringing up the next generation of leaders so that they can navigate this minefield a lot better, using things around respect, culture, understanding, ethnocentrism? How do we make sure that we're bringing back these leaders?
Well, you see, awareness is absolutely crucial, and you're right. Education is paramount. And if we start with a core commonly shared value, which you mentioned, which is respect, and I explored that concept in depth. Now, respect can mean disrespect in another culture. If disrespect occurs because of lack of awareness, because we tend to give others our respect without realizing that is exactly what we're doing, and they're doing the same. But our respect could mean their disrespect, and it can breach the Equality Act 2010 based on the 9 protected characteristics. And you don't know. I've written a chapter in a book recently, Global Diversity Management. That's a Springer book, and it's been listed as one of the most important diversity books to share insight to exactly that. Where even big, large organizations like Abercrombie Fitch were sued successfully for discrimination, and they still didn't know what they did wrong. At one point, a judge actually ordered one particular large organization to go on diversity awareness training because they kept making the same mistake. They were actually successfully prosecuted on three occasions to the tune of the minimum was $17.5 million. And that's a lot of money. It's not just the monetary implications, but it's the reputation. No organization can afford to be lacking in diversity awareness.
Okay, last minute, what would you say is we need going forward, especially in terms of, I don't know if you want to respond to the report or your opinion on the Commission on Race and Ethnicity disparity report findings. Not a big response, but just bearing in mind what you've been talking about and basically what's the narrative that's coming out now. Does it match?
No, it doesn't match. And to say or to undertake a study and conclude in this way that institutionalized racism doesn't exist is foolish, to say the least. It tells me that study, there could be a bias. It doesn't mean that was the motivation, but also the study is limited. Go speak to the people in those organizations that have the experience. Where is the narrative? Where are the testimonies? Bearing in mind that a lot of people find it very difficult to come forward and tell you what's really happening because of fear of punishment, discipline, and so on. But let me tell you, it exists. And
okay, well, we'll get back to you. Sorry, I cut you off then. Sorry, what was you going to say?
I'm one for evidence.
Yeah. And, you know, it's going to be that's going to have a long debate. I can see that. We'll probably come back to that report on another show. Right. Without further ado, Grace, it's your turn. You want to introduce yourself because I know you have a number of roles. I'm really excited to have you. Welcome. It's your first National Black Women's Network appointment. So, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here.
You're amongst the sisters.
Remember, I used to take part in your events years ago, like over 10 years, 15 years ago. So it was a wonderful surprise when you contacted me out of the blue because I was wondering what had happened to you. So I'm really proud to be here as a speaker. It's a great honor indeed. So my name is Grace Moronfolu, and I'm the chair of the National Black Crown Prosecution Association. And I'm also deputy chair of the Civil Service Race Forum, which is a cross-government network of all of the Black and Black, Asian, ethnic minority networks across government. So yeah, I'm not sure if we can use the word BAME anymore. So I'm going to, for this discussion, I'm going to use the term global majority because we haven't been actually told what the new terminology is. So I hope that'll be okay.
Well, you heard it here first. Global majority. Carry on.
Yeah, so I don't know what your question is for me. I want to talk a little bit about the Crown Prosecution Service because I've worked for the Crown Prosecution Service for a long time. And it's a very interesting organization. We're part of the criminal justice system. And my day job, actually, because I hope you don't think that being chair is a full-time job. I do that on top of my job, and including the civil service race forum roles on top of my day job. My day job is working to try and help explain what the Crown Prosecution Service does to the communities that we serve, because we often get mixed up with the police or the court service. And actually, our role is very limited. Our role is to receive the cases that have been charged by the police. We review that and then we present them before the court. So we don't pass judgment about whether a person is guilty. We don't pass sentence. We just present them in a neutral and fair way to both the victims and defendants. So it's quite an interesting role that the CPS, that the Crown Prosecution Service has.
How has it changed in the last 10 years?
Oh gosh. Well, the Crown Prosecution Service itself, you mean in terms of what? In terms of our service delivery?
In BME, for the support for BME staff, and in terms of policies, in terms of progression, representation. Any more words?
Yeah, that's fine. I think we need to go back further than 10 years. In the late 1980s 1990s, the Crown Prosecution Service lost a series of industrial tribunal cases where staff, black, ethnic minority, Asian staff had brought the CPS to court to prove that they'd been racist and treated them unfairly. The CPS lost a numerous amount of cases. It was actually labeled as an institutionally racist organization before the police had their label, but we didn't get as much publicity. However, what has been wonderful is that the CPS turned themselves around. Within 3 years, they completely reviewed their policies and including service delivery, because at the time, it wasn't just about racism and the way it treated its staff. They were very clear. It also affected our service delivery as well. And that was in relation to the way we were charging the global majority defendants when they came through. We weren't checking enough to make sure that there was enough evidence against them. We were just charging them without actually doing our due diligence and making sure the evidence stacked up. However, like I said, that was in the late 1990s. It was also around the time of Stephen Lawrence's death, remember? I think that was in 2003. There was a lot going on around that time. And like I said, the CPS restructured itself, and it realized the benefit of understanding its staff and valuing all of its staff and the value that staff brought to its service and the way we deliver our services. So what happened, I'll just give you an example. In relation to our service, that's why equality and diversity is good for business.
Yeah.
Once they realized that there was a big issue that they had to tackle, it took very great courageous leadership, I must say, to tackle that, because you can imagine there was at the time a lot of backlash as well. But they realized that they had to rethink a lot of things that people had taken for granted. So around that time was the emergence of hate crime. Before that time, before Stephen Lawrence's death even, there was no such thing as hate crime. You could be punched in the face by a racist thug and they would be charged with punching you in the face, but they wouldn't actually be charged with the aggravated facts that they punched you because of your color, because of who you were. So the CPS helped develop that concept of hate crime. Initially, it was just about racist hate crime, but as everybody knows, over the years, it's blossomed into hate crime about disability hate crime, religious hate crime in relation to the sexual orientation and transgender identity. So the CPS has been at the cutting edge in evolving the way our services are delivered. And the point is, with hate crime, it's about the victims, making sure that people feel confident to report crimes like this. And of course, the biggest aspect of our hate crime was the development of the violence against women agenda. Because taking us back, I do want to go on about, that's another big issue.
I was actually going to interject and say, if you think about the conditions we're in, the pandemic and the lockdowns, how many, and I know that some men do get abused as well, but our focus is obviously on women, that many of them are now trapped in the home with their abuser. And what steps, I know people are vocally saying, we're trying to provide help. I mean, I liked what Boots did in terms of saying, come in. I like the fact that they could get private journeys on the train. But actually, if you're in that house, oftentimes, even if the police are called, it's very difficult for the woman at that time, in that emotional state, I believe, to press forward. What more could be done to support those women to actually say, you don't have to do it now. Give you a week, come back. Should be rational. How do we put that process? And I know Dorian's going to come in on that with me, but as a laywoman, I would say, well, he gets away with it. The sentencing doesn't reflect the damage that's been done.
I think you're asking this question to me on a personal basis because the CPS, we prosecute, we don't provide support to victims. Well, we provide support if they're coming to court to give evidence. But what we do is we offer support and advice to the organizations that support women who've experienced domestic abuse. And we are aware, as an organization, it's been mentioned that a lot of women are trapped because of the lockdown. In fact, the CPS went as far as to say its own staff might be trapped in domestic, in abusive relationships where they can't actually get out. Whether you're male or female, you might be in a domestic, a very, a violent relationship or an abusive relationship, because it's not just violence, it's also about coercion and mental trauma and abuse as well. So the CPS has done a lot to support organizations to reassure victims that when those cases are being prioritized through the court system, where we can get them prioritized when we prosecute. So we've done quite a lot in relation to that. But I think for me, the most important thing is that women, particularly ethnic minority women, I say ethnic minority, women of color. I can't remember what terminology. I'll just use BAME for the time being.
Yeah.
But for our communities in particular, it's very challenging, particularly with the additional pressure of culture and expectation, and also the fact that for some of us, going to the police it can be as traumatic as the incident itself. There's so many repercussions that can happen when people from our community report to the police because of the experiences that we've had sometimes in relation to the way some police officers engage with our communities. I know one of the common examples given is you report a crime, the police come to your house and start looking around for evidence of other things, so people often feel very worried and concerned. And what we want to do as a service is to make sure that women feel confident to report. We want to work in partnership with the police to make sure that particularly people from ethnic minority communities have that confidence, especially our women, and that they come forward and report, and that there's lots of support services as well. I must say the CPS have worked with lots of organizations to make sure there are support services. I'm aware that there's refuges, for example, specifically for women of color. Some refuges are just for particular types of women. It might be for Muslim women, for example. There might be some refuges out there. The only issue I would say is about the funding, and a lot of refuges and places like that have some challenges in getting funding to support women. But I know the government has just released a package of funding which groups could bid for to support women. But it's a very complex issue because a lot of it is reliant on resources, isn't it?
Yeah. So finally, what have you been most proud of in terms of the network, etc., and the CPS as a whole, as an organisation? What have you been most proud of in terms of its work around diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, for me personally, I've been very proud of the National Black Crown Prosecution Association. The association came about in the late, we're very old, we're 20 years old actually. This year is our 20th anniversary. So we're what you might describe as a very mature network. We came about because of the issues in relation to the CPS having to turn itself around. We were part of the recommendations of the Denman inquiry that made it clear that Black and ethnic minority staff didn't have a voice. At the time the industrial tribunal cases were going on 20 years ago, the senior management team at the time said they weren't aware of all the bullying and discrimination and all the bad practice that was going on. And part of the reason they weren't aware is that the staff, individual staff in little pockets, didn't have a voice. So what I'm really proud of is the way the NBCPA has gone from strength to strength. And now the network over the years has developed into a critical friend of the CPS. We work in partnership with the Crown Prosecution Service, and we're not just adding value in relation to our members' career progression and development. We're also adding value in relation to our department's service delivery. And I think this is so important for staff networks because it kind of links into the fact that where discrimination and unfairness occurs in the way an organization manages its staff, it will also occur in the way it delivers its services to the community. And I'm really proud that the CPS see us as an organization, our network as a support to help understand and raise awareness of some of the issues in the community and help act as a kind of conduit in the way that the organization can't. Sometimes corporate organizations can be very bureaucratic and can't, even when they try, sometimes they can't get underneath the skin of issues. For example, honor-based offending. I'll just, if you don't mind, just give you an example of honor-based offending. where communities take the law into their own hands when they feel they've been shamed somehow, particularly by women, sometimes by men as well, based on cultural expectations. Now, we've had conferences where we're able to make it very clear that it wasn't just the perception that it's just Asian communities. That's what people tend to think in relation to unconscious bias about honor-based offending, but actually it's all communities. Even in English communities where you have very wealthy people who don't want their child to marry someone from a poor background, you often get a lot of, the very same thing, like kidnapping people, locking them in the house so they stop them from seeing their boyfriend, whatever. These things, I think we brought to the fore that it wasn't something that was just limited to one particular group or one particular community. It was something that was quite universal, actually, and it needs to be understood that way. So all victims feel they have the opportunity to reach out and report incidents to the police. So can you imagine if you're an English girl and your dad's locked you up because he's a millionaire? It's happened in some community. We've had some examples of that anyway. But can you imagine feeling that you can't report it because the only people who experience this have to be from a particular community, have to be ethnic minorities, when actually it's not true? So those are the kind of things that we bring to the fore as a network. And
So as I kind of, I like what you say, and I'm just conscious of time, but one of the things I was going to say, I want to talk about, you talked about no voice. And that's really important, because I was talking about the sort of monoculture, because again, you say bureaucratic, but again, these models have been set up. I just want to, can we bring in Dr. Dorian Wilson? Again, how do you see that experience in your organisation? And then I'll come to you, Janet, as well.
I missed you there. So can you repeat that question, Sonia, please?
So talking about having a voice in the organisation. So many of that global majority do not feel that they have a voice. How would you respond to that, especially in education?
It is absolutely something I've been talking about recently with my co-chair colleagues, and the university is addressing the issue. There must be a space without constraint, criticism, that those that come forward with their issues feel that they're not going to be punished for having voice, for explaining. And the way I see it is that for an organization to be informed and know what strategies, procedures, and policies to introduce to the organization to address issues of marginalization, discrimination from any of the 9 protected characteristics and beyond, because it's not just the 9 protected characteristics. It has to hear for themselves, and the only way that they can hear is to listen to the voices of those who are experiencing it. And there's also the concept of perceived discrimination, where individuals have had a negative experience, maybe more than 1 or 2 experiences of people that look like you or them. So there might be an assumption, here we go again, it's going to happen to me again. So behaviors might manifest in a way that that person says straight away, I'm being discriminated against. Not unless you afford them the space to have voice so they can describe what it is, the behavior, what was said. Is it the words? Is it the terminology? Is it the look, and so on? Because coming back to respect, in some cultures, looking someone older and more senior than you in the eye is perceived as disrespectful. In the British culture, the Western culture, that's what's expected. If you don't look them in the eye, the assumption is you're not being honest and you're being disrespectful in extremes, which is why cultural exchange and promoting greater understanding of different cultures and how, for example, respect manifests in behavior is important.
I'll tell you what it flows down to me, because I think if I look at the top of the pipeline, people get it. They understand it. They understand what it means. They understand that they need to have diverse staff, diverse talent, in order to reflect in not only internally, because obviously they want this to be the place where people want to work, but also in the services they offer, both in their community and in people who purchase from them. So even as public sector, people are still purchasing services. My issue is, how do we make that translate down further down the pipeline? Because yes, we're doing great stuff, but how are we giving them the tools to actually move along the pipeline?
Can I just
Just jump. You're amongst girls. Just interject. The only thing we don't have is the wine.
I think one of the ways that we need to refocus our efforts is that sometimes we need to remember why equality and diversity adds value. There's no point. Sometimes I think we forget to tell, like, the junior management that there is a reason that some people from the global majority have lots of skills and ideas and can actually rejuvenate an organization. They can add value, but the narrative is often very different. And then when an organization invests in somebody who doesn't look like everybody else, they forget that it's not just enough to recruit them. They must also support them the way they support everybody else. But they tend to, sometimes that their staff are not given enough support, and they're kind of abandoned once they've got, they've recruited somebody who looks different, or they think they've ticked that equality box. And it's so important that that support continues all the way through. And it's one of the things we've noticed, and it's not we've put in, the CPS has put a lot of management development programs in place. And also as a network, we too are aware that support can often be intangible to describe, but we try to provide that. And I'll give you an example. This is not just about recruitment. This is like when you're trying to develop people. Sometimes, for example, the sponsoring that or the mentoring that people get from other colleagues, like from white colleagues, they take it for granted when someone calls you and gives you a chat about your application form. We're well aware that some of our members never get that chat. They're never called in. They're never told, oh, let's have a look at your application form for you. So we, as a network, we provide that. As soon as we know the CPS is doing a national recruitment campaign, we get together, we get everyone, all the experts, we call people like Janet in, if she can sit on a panel, and we do mock panels. We look at people's application forms, and most importantly, we give people confidence and encouragement, because that's the thing sometimes that is missing, that is intangible. You can't actually put your finger on it. But it's just telling someone, yes, you've got a good application, or yeah, you did well in that mock interview. This is how you can improve. Those just few words make a huge difference to a person who's constantly told they're not quite there yet by everybody else in their team. So I think the staff networks have a huge role to play in helping fill that gap. Sorry.
Thank you. Conscious of time. Janet, what do you feel in terms, and one of the things I was talking about is having a voice. So do you believe that the subject majority, what did we say it was? The cultural majority? The global majority. I'll get there in the end. Do you believe that the global majority in your staff have a voice that will help them progress along the organisation, upwards towards the top of the organisation without changing? Because oftentimes they say, I value you as you are because I think you could bring something different to the organisation. But by the time they get to the top, it's a very different person you're seeing. So Janet,
yeah, that is why, I completely agree with what's been said already, but, the importance of networks. As an individual, it is so easy to come across those barriers that impact on you personally. And therefore, when you are trying to raise the issue or trying to progress the issue, it could be that is weighted more on your shoulders. As a network, we as a group are stronger together. There is strength in unity around the issues. Our lived experiences are more or less the same. And if you have a collective voice, talking about the issues and raising those issues, it takes that individual need off. They can then focus on their careers, knowing that the issues or the challenges that have been brought to the table are being spoken about at the top levels. And that's why it's really important for the National Black Crown Prosecutors and the police to have this service, this network available for people to come along and express that. And having someone that looks like you, that understands it. You don't have to go into chapter and verse around, saying what the challenge is. We will sit there and think, we get it. We absolutely get it. And we'll be able to have, because of the years that we've been as an association involved in all of the work, that actually we can pick it up and run with it almost straight away. And to be fair, you know, the National Black Crown Prosecutors, and as well as the National and the Met BPA, we are well thought of in that world. We are respected, and people do come to us for an opinion, and our members come to us for that support and guidance and mentoring and help that they need. It's just a shame in the Met particular and nationally, we don't have necessarily the ones that you say get to the top. They're just not there, and that's why the network is really, really important. And for the ones that are there, they want to help, but again, they're individuals, they're trying to progress their own career, and that's why it's really important that we lean on the networks to do that bit of work.
I mean, we've just got under 5 minutes, so I want this last few minutes to be stimulating and vibrant, and I want something for our audience to take away. You know, if you were saying to them, look, how to avoid leading by fear, because you know that's the stress and the mental health on a scale of 1 to 10. Talking about microaggressions, you know, the bullying, because even looking at that report, I said that is a bit of a microaggression, that little report that's come out there, and how to recognize it, but not only see it in a negative way, but find solutions to overcome those barriers. Because oftentimes I feel we're acting like schizophrenics. See, we're one way at home, then we have to go into work and have a mask on, and it's a lot of pressure. And then you've got to come back, and you might have other issues you're dealing with at home. So all your intersectionality stuff that's going on there. And so how do we manage that? How do we give our audience an opportunity? Look, if this is going on, the first thing you do, get a mentor. If you can find a sponsor, then you find a network. Now what?
What I would say is the law is the law, because you have the UK Equality Act 2010, and it makes it absolutely clear, direct, indirect, or due to a lack of awareness, if there is a breach of the legislation, then that is the overriding protection, if we call it that, if we refer to it in that way. Now, it's so easy for individuals, victims, to live the victim for a long time, and therefore assume nothing will be done, I will never be heard, and therefore do nothing about it. You will be heard. You must find your voice. Come forward. There will always be a sympathizer in the organization that you can speak to. Organizations have the duty of care, and they have to be compliant. No organization or no leader wants to be accused of discrimination, particularly if it breaches the Equality Act of 2010. That is more from 116 prior Equality Acts. So go find someone that you can report it to. But before you do that, make sure that you document, give examples of the behavior.
Always have that diary.
Absolutely. And all you need is a table, list, not subjectively, where it might be assumed that that's your opinion. If it's hard facts, this is what happened. Describe it in brief bullet points, and then demonstrate where you believe there has been a breach of the legislation. Every organization drawing on the works of Michael Armstrong, who says people are a key resource in the organization. The organization cannot survive without people. So you don't want to make people unhappy, or else they're not going to be committed. They will leave. If they leave, there's a talent bleed. And
yeah, and there's a cost. There's a cost to them leaving. Like we're about 1.5 minutes. Grace, do you want to come in? And I want to get you in again, Janet.
Just quickly, I'll just say very quickly that I think especially with the report that's come out, one, don't be emotional about it. Put our emotions to one side. We've been through this before. It's not a big deal, to be honest. We're used to dealing with microaggressions, and we will get through this. What I would say, though, is think very carefully and strategically about what it is you want as the outcome. Getting angry and upset about anything isn't going to make a difference. And from the CPS perspective, we're a legal organization, so everything has to be very factual and emotion removed. And that, to me, that's been very effective in driving things forward. Take your emotions out, look at things on a factual basis.
And I've just been told, because we started late, we've got an extra 4 minutes, I think. Okay, but on saying that, again, that's where networks are important, because you might be feeling emotional, and then Janet, you just nodded your head there, so I know you're going to come in next. But you might be feeling really emotional and oftentimes isolated. And then you as you say, you don't have a voice, and then obviously that brings on other pressures. But again, Janet, we must have seen that in the Met so many times where people didn't feel they had a voice, and then it ends up in a what do you call it, disciplinary, because obviously they're not engaged. Go on, because I don't work there, so.
Yeah. So yeah, you know, in terms of the microaggressions, I think it's really important that a lot of the time when members speak to us about microaggressions, they're not actually saying it's a microaggression, because obviously they don't know the language. They're describing the experience. But from the moment you feel that way, a lot of the time about the sort of undercurrent of racism is that it's not in your face, so therefore not easy for you to evidence and take that to someone and say, this happened to me because of the way it's done. So for me, it's really important at the earliest opportunity to remember that you're not going mad. If you feel that something isn't right, then talk to someone in the first instance and establish what it is. But try not to let each of the occasions that has happened then have this spiraling effect on you. So identify it as early as you can. Speak to someone who understand what it is you're saying, because we can take it to a manager, but because their lived experience or the lens isn't the same, then they won't necessarily identify and fob it off as something being low level or not important, when actually it's a build up of that.
Can I throw this in? So in the good old days, we used to have the Christmas party, and you know, your boss would come in, morning love, make me a cup of coffee, make me a cup of tea, all of that language, that banter, which is now totally forbidden. But so in public sector and big organizations, they know the language, but as you go further and further down, they forget. And then now there's this thing about wokeism and cancel culture. How is that impacting some of the way you're working and delivering on the DE&I agenda? So throwing it out, because we've only got about 3 minutes. So you've got to be quick.
The key thing is, we're working with like Dr. Dorian in the educational piece, because that's where it needs to fall. There needs to be an education. There are things that I didn't learn at school that I'm only learning about now. And you're thinking, well, if I haven't learned it, what chances of my white counterparts would know about it? So for me, there needs to be, running alongside all of the D&I work, is an educational piece that people can explore and start understand some of the challenges that are faced. So, you know, I think we're working with Dr. Dorian on that, and she's, I know, developing a strategy for us.
Absolutely. And a famous toolkit. Go on, Dorian?
Absolutely.
Very quickly, jump in, you know, we haven't got much time.
And even being able to identify what constitutes microaggressions, such as, oh, you sound white, or can I touch your hair?
Oh gosh.
Yep. These are just
hair discrimination.
It isn't right, but these are examples of microaggression, and not because the person who says these things says, no, that's not what I meant. They might not be aware that. Where is it coming from? Always put the ball back in their court. Ask, what an interesting comment. What did you mean? Put the ball back in their court. It affords them the opportunity to reflect on their words and not to take them for granted, because it comes from somewhere. What does that mean? I thought you were white. And there's so
right. Grace, I'm going to give you 60 seconds, and you're going to finalize and wrap it up. But what I want as well is, even when you're wrapping it up, I want some takeaway solutions for our audience listening in, who've battled in and said, right, I want something out of it. I don't want it to be just a moaning. These are the things I experienced. I know this already, but what can I do to move forward? Did you see that little passion there I had?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Personally, I think anything around woke agenda, we've got to think very carefully what's behind it. Personally, I think it's a distraction. And a lot of I think we shouldn't get caught into that nonsense. We need to think exactly specifically about what it is we want. We need to be able to articulate what we want and not get caught up in all the rubbish that they use. I mean, look at the arguments about whether to use BAME or not BAME, and now they've taken BAME away. There's nothing. No replacements. There's nothing.
Well, I must
stop you. Quick, you've got 10 seconds.
BAE.
We haven't got.
my alternative.
Dorian or Janet, 10 seconds because I'm cutting you off in a minute.
Black, Asian, and all other groups. All, not otherness. No, all.
Okay.
BAAE.
I just
Janet,
think
you've got
we just need to be treated in a, we're all human beings, we're all individual, and we need to be treated as such. We shouldn't be grouped together, and you know, just bring you, your authentic self, to whatever it is that you do.
Okay, so we are running late. Thank you, thank you, thank you. What does this mean? Do you want to come back for part 2?
Oh,
Grace?
Yeah, definitely.
Dorian?
It's really interesting.
Janet, I knew you would. You're my girl. So listen, we are running seconds over. People, if you've got any more comments, put them in now. If you want to hear anything, put some comments in. And if the questions, we'll sort out a day. It'll probably be a month's time or something like, or 6 weeks time, because we want to be able to bring in some of the findings of the report, because you know by that time it'll be crazy. So I want to thank our panelists. Let's give them a virtual woo, woo, woo. You were great, amazing, fantastic. And I respect you all. And that's what we want. Respectful role models. Okay. So if you want to, we're going to, this is recorded. And so we will have it up on the platform soon. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Tell everyone who didn't tune in, you missed a great show. So on that note, www.nbwn.org, subscribe. You belong here. Have a great evening, and it's time for the wine. Woo! Bye.